Sometimes procrastination is not about not caring. It is about a brain that already feels too full to take on one more thing. A lot of people use the word procrastination as if it explains everything. They say, I keep putting things off. I know what I need to do, so why am I still not doing it? Why do I waste so much time? Why can't I just start? And after a while, many people turn that pattern into an identity. They stop saying, I am struggling to begin, and start saying, I am just lazy. I am just undisciplined. I am the kind of person who never gets things done. But that is not always the most accurate story. Because sometimes what looks like procrastination from the outside feels very different on the inside. It does not always feel like, I do not care. It often feels more like, I cannot get myself to enter this. Not because the task is impossible. Not because you are irresponsible. But because your brain is already carrying too much noise, too much switching, too much internal pressure, and too much unfinished demand. And when that happens, beginning one more thing can start to feel heavier than it looks. It can feel like one more thing to hold. One more thing to track. One more thing to get wrong. One more thing asking something from a system that already feels stretched thin. So this is not really a story about how to stop being lazy. It is a story about why overload can start wearing the costume of procrastination. Point 1. What looks like procrastination often feels like friction, not laziness. One of the first things people miss is that procrastination does not always feel like refusal. A lot of the time, it feels like friction. You know the task matters. You may even want the relief of having it done. You may think about it all day. You may feel guilty that it is still sitting there. And yet you still do not begin. That experience is deeply confusing, because it creates a painful split inside the person. Part of you cares. Part of you wants movement. Part of you wants to stop carrying the task around mentally. And still, when the moment comes to begin, something in you tightens. You hesitate. You delay. You click away. You get up. You check something else. You tell yourself you will do it in 10 minutes. And then another hour passes. That does not always come from indifference. Often it comes from internal resistance that is hard to name. A kind of mental drag. A feeling that the task is not just a task. It is a demand. An activation. A doorway into more pressure. And when people do not understand that, they reduce the whole experience to character. They call themselves lazy when what they are actually feeling is overload plus friction. Not a lack of values. Not a lack of intelligence. Not a lack of desire to do well. Just a system that no longer experiences beginning as simple. Point 2. Starting a task can feel like stepping into more demand. This is where overstimulation becomes really important. Because when a brain is already overloaded, a task is rarely just a task. It is also decisions. Attention. Uncertainty. Self-monitoring. Possibly disappointment. Possibly failure. Possibly comparison. Possibly more tabs opening in your head. And that matters, because the outside world often looks at procrastination very literally. There is a task. Just start it. But from the inside, starting can feel like stepping into a whole chain of activation. You are not only opening the document. You are opening the pressure around the document. You are not only answering the message. You are opening the emotional demand of answering it. You are not only beginning the chore. You are entering the mental weight that has been attached to it all day. For an overloaded brain, that can feel like too much. Especially if your system is already tired, scattered, or slightly braced. So when you delay, it may not be because the task is objectively too hard. It may be because your system experiences it as one more thing that will cost energy you do not feel you have. One more thing that will pull on already fragmented attention. One more thing that will ask you to organize yourself when you already feel internally disorganized. And once you see that, procrastination starts to look less like a mystery and more like a nervous system trying to avoid further strain. Point 3. Overstimulated brains often choose quick relief over meaningful progress. When a system is overloaded, it usually does not choose based on what matters most long-term. It chooses based on what feels easiest to enter right now. And that is a big reason why overstimulation can look so much like procrastination. Because quick relief is often easier to access than meaningful progress. Checking your phone is easier than beginning the report. Answering a tiny message is easier than opening the emotionally heavier task. Rearranging your desk is easier than touching the thing you have been dreading. Watching one more short video is easier than entering sustained concentration. Doing a small errand is easier than beginning the work that carries pressure, uncertainty, or mental complexity. That does not mean these choices are random. And it does not mean you are secretly choosing the bad thing because you are weak. It often means your brain is looking for an option with lower entry cost, lower pressure, lower activation, lower chance of feeling overwhelmed immediately. In that moment, quick relief feels more possible than deeper effort. And the tragic part is that many of those quick relief choices do help a little. They make the moment easier to bear. They reduce the discomfort just enough to keep going. But they do not resolve the task. So the pressure stays. The task stays. The guilt stays. And because the task is now carrying even more emotional weight than before, it becomes even harder to enter later. That is how overload turns into a loop. Not because the person does not care, but because the system keeps choosing what feels survivable in the short term. Point 4. Shame turns difficulty into paralysis. This is where the experience often gets much worse. Because after enough delay, people stop seeing the problem as overload and start seeing it as identity. They stop saying, "Something about this is hard for my system right now," and start saying, "I am ridiculous. I always do this. I ruin everything. Why am I like this?" And once shame enters, the task gets heavier. Now it is not only the email, the project, the phone call, the form, the assignment, or the chore. Now it is also proof. Proof that you are behind. Proof that you are failing. Proof that you cannot trust yourself. Proof that other people are better at basic life than you are. That emotional layer matters more than people realize. Because shame does not energize a tired nervous system. It tightens it. It makes the task feel even more threatening. Even more emotionally loaded. Even more connected to self-worth. And then the person delays more, not less. Not because shame is ineffective in a moral sense, but because shame increases activation. And an already overloaded brain does not need more activation in order to begin. It usually needs less. That is why people can spend an entire day avoiding one task while thinking about it the whole time. They are not relaxed. They are not carefree. They are often trapped between demand and self-attack. And from the inside, that feels much closer to paralysis than laziness. Point 5. What helps is lowering the entry cost, not attacking yourself harder. If overstimulation is what is sitting underneath the procrastination, then the answer cannot just be more pressure. Because pressure is often already part of the problem. What helps more is lowering the entry cost. Helping the system feel that beginning is not the same as drowning. That the task does not have to be entered all at once. That starting is not a full surrender to pressure. That movement can be smaller, softer, and less punishing than your brain expects. Sometimes what an overloaded person needs is not motivation. It is a gentler doorway. Less intensity around the task. Less all-or-nothing thinking. Less internal shouting. Less framing the moment as a test of worth. Because once the task becomes emotionally gigantic, the nervous system stops reading it as a simple action and starts reading it as a threat. And threats do not invite calm entry. They invite avoidance, scanning, delay, and escape. So if you notice that overstimulation keeps showing up like procrastination, it may help to stop asking, "How do I force myself harder?" and begin asking, "How do I make beginning feel a little less expensive for my system?" That is a very different question. A gentler one. A more useful one. Because real movement often begins when the nervous system no longer feels like it is being shoved into another wall of demand. Closing. If overstimulation keeps showing up like procrastination, that does not mean you are lazy. It does not mean you do not care. And it does not mean you are incapable of discipline. It may mean your system is already carrying so much internal demand that beginning one more thing feels heavier than it looks from the outside. It may mean tasks have stopped feeling like simple actions and started feeling like entry points into more pressure. It may mean your brain has been living in so much noise, switching, activation, and self-monitoring that avoidance has begun to look like protection. Not helpful protection. Not deep relief. But protection all the same. And once you understand that, something important begins to soften. Because now you are no longer fighting yourself in the language of shame. You are seeing the pattern more accurately. Not as proof that you are broken, but as a sign that your system may be overloaded enough that starting no longer feels neutral. That changes the problem. And when the problem changes, the way forward changes too. Not more self-attack. Not more identity damage. Not more calling yourself lazy until you finally move. But less pressure. Less confusion. Less shame. And a more honest understanding of what your brain may be trying to protect you from when it keeps delaying what matters. When you procrastinate, what usually feels hardest? Starting, focusing, or dealing with the pressure around the task?